Hey everybody, welcome back to the Lust is Boring podcast. As you know, a lot of times we'll have different experts, well-known speakers and authors on the program that discuss hot topics regarding sexual ethics, love, relationships, vocations. And then other times we have speakers that tend to be more of my favorite, where they're not perhaps so well-known, but their stories to me, I don't know. I enjoy those interviews more than anything. Just the authenticity of a life lived with Christ. And so we're going to have on today a gentleman that I just met 2 weeks ago that I thought had such a remarkable conversion story. I was like, dude, we just got to get you on the podcast. I just want people to hear what God has done in your life. And so stay tuned. It's going to be one of the neater episodes that you've heard of just how God can jump into anybody's life at any given moment and take them from point A to Z in a flash. And so you're not going to miss the show today. Also, I want to invite anyone. There's still time if you want to come with Father Agustino Torres and I to be with Our Lady of Guadalupe on her feast day, December 12th in Mexico City. So if you're feeling kind of spontaneous, you want to fly to Mexico in the next 4 weeks and just join us with, I don't know, 1 million of our closest friends there at the Basilica, do a little service work in Mexico. There's still time, a couple slots that you can get in if you want to bring you, your family, whether you're in college, young adult, family with high school kids, grandparents, married couples. Everybody's welcome to come. It's going to be a great time. I think it's frankly just worth it to spend a week with Father Agustino Torres, but it's just going to be a fantastic experience to see the miraculous image of Our Lady of Guadalupe on her feast day in Mexico City. So just go to chastity.com/pilgrimage. You can find all the details there. Now, today, our guest, Kailash Duraiswami, he joined the Catholic Church as an adult convert living, of all places, in San Francisco. Kailash is a technology entrepreneur, most recently in the artificial intelligence space as the founder of Panterix. Now, that's an artificial intelligence platform that automates manual data entry for financial service companies through computer vision. Now, Panterix was acquired by financial services software provider Orion Advisor Solution in spring of 2021. Kailash, thank you for, with such short notice, coming onto the program and being with us on Lust is Boring.
That is my great pleasure, Jason. Thank you very much for having me.
Yeah, like as I mentioned, we just met. I was out in Denver at a speaking engagement, and we met through a mutual friend, and you and I just got talking for 10, 15 minutes, and I thought, hey, this would be cool to have this guy on the show. Just people to hear the stories. I don't even know where to begin with you. I don't even want to begin upbringing, so people have an idea where you're coming from, the story, because it's just a remarkable story. I feel like jumping in at any given point of the testimony, but where do you feel like starting in terms of your story?
I think it makes definitely the most sense to start at the beginning. Yeah. I was born in Florida. I actually was born in the same town that Governor DeSantis is from. So Dunedin, Florida. It's a very small town. And
I was born in Miami.
From India. Okay, great. Yeah. So you're a Florida native as well. My parents moved from India. And back then, my father's a doctor. And back then, you couldn't really choose so much where you were going to live. There was not every state had reciprocity for medical licenses that were from overseas. And Florida was a state that did. And they wanted hot weather. So that was how they wound up in this. It was a very American town. My mother tells me it was a small town where everyone knew each other in the grocery store. Everyone knew each other in the school. We were one of very few non-white families there. And it was quite conservative. And I had some exposure to Christianity from people who lived there. I would say mostly Protestant, but it made no influence on me. And my heritage and upbringing was Hindu. My family is still quite devout. And that was the formation of spirituality that I had, where we would go to different functions, different events at the Hindu temple that was nearby to where I lived. And I was the president of the Hindu Students Association of my college. It was a very strong part of my identity. It was a philosophy that aligned with it was the philosophy that formed how I thought completely, I would say, when it came to supernatural matters. But unfortunately, as I went through high school and as I certainly went through college and moved to San Francisco, as you mentioned, I fell away from any kind of relationship with God more and more. And I went really into atheism. And I read books by Sam Harris, and I read books by all of Richard Dawkins, all these new atheists. And I believed what I think many people in my generation believe, that science was the ultimate explanation for every phenomena that we observe in the universe. And it was the golden standard for how we were supposed to think about this world. And that's what I believed completely. And really, that was a way that I had a crutch or an excuse to behave in a lot of extremely immoral ways, which we kind of went into. But I would party a lot and tons of girlfriends, and there was really no moral formation in how I lived. And you mentioned living in a large city in San Francisco. You're doing really well for yourself financially. You're surrounded by other people who are doing really well for themselves. And there's no agency in your motivations. It's all about what is subject to your appetites. And a lot of people who live there have enough money to do whatever they want. And it's just a ton of people that are 35 years and younger, just doing everything they want. And it really is a recipe for disaster when it comes to any kind of morality. And that's sort of how I lived all the way up until I found the faith.
Mm-hmm. Now, in the midst of this world, you'd mentioned to me that you're partying. Is this at this point where you're going to Las Vegas and like partying with billionaires and all that stuff? And is that kind of in a later chapter, or did that start pretty much right after college and your young professional life? Kind of got swept up into all that?
Yeah, I would say the point at which I just ended the story, I was doing that very much. You know, the most exclusive VIP experiences you can imagine in San Francisco, Las Vegas. Yeah, people literally who were billionaires. I would be at parties in Silicon Valley with them. And yeah, I mean, you can imagine if you have literally $1 billion as your net worth and you're not married and you don't have kids, like your lifestyle will be really untethered from reality. And I would be around people like that for sure. And right, it would be, you know, clubs in Vegas or whatever experience, and doing drugs, drinking alcohol, you name it. There was really no boundary as to what satisfaction we wanted to have. And absolutely, that would include interpersonal relationships with women. And I don't even think it's really fair to say that they were my girlfriend. It's very casual. It's unfortunate, but like I said, that's how life can be when there's no framework for how you can think and you have enough freedom to do anything, and you don't know the truth. I mean, that's really where I was at, and I was surrounded by people who were there as well.
Now the emptiness, obviously, that inevitably follows trying to gorge yourself on everything that the world has to offer, you know, it leaves you the kind of pit of emptiness and meaninglessness. Did you find that other people were sensing the same thing that you were, in terms of like, man, I feel like I'm just, you know, pouring all this water into a hole in the beach and like everything's flowing through? Did you feel like you were the only one that was dissatisfied but having to act like you're living the best life ever? Or did you ever have like meaningful conversation with people of them not being happy? Or did you just kind of think that you were the odd one out because you felt unfulfilled?
Yeah, I mean, I was thinking about that given the title of your podcast, Lust is Boring. And I thought, you know, if you asked me at that time, am I bored? I seriously doubt I would have said yes. Yeah. And to answer your question about other people around me, no, we would never speak about anything of that nature. And I'm not sure that anyone I knew, including myself, had the tools or capability to really ask those introspective questions. So I was unhappy, but I didn't realize it. And I was surrounded by people who were also very unhappy and didn't realize it. And as I found the Christian faith, as that story continues, I almost marveled at the fact that I knew people, including myself, who were quite wealthy, who were quite unhappy at my age. And it was something that did draw me closer to Christianity, because as I started to face the facts, I knew I was unhappy. But at that time, if you had asked me, I was really in a state where I couldn't even ask those questions of myself. And I think a lot of people in my generation are there, very detached from a Christian foundation of thinking. And what that means is you may not even have the tools to ask yourself if lust is boring. It is. Yeah. We know that to be true, but it's even hard to acknowledge that when you're in those states of life.
What started to flip the switch for you? I mean, you're in the midst of this, of every worldly pleasure and consolation imaginable, everything the world told you, hey, you know, once you've got this, you've got it all. There's nothing left to want. Like, what made you start looking for something other than, because it seemed like, hey, my plate's full. I mean, I've reached the top of the mountain. What made you start second guessing? Like, is this all there is?
Yeah, exactly. And that event had nothing really to do with my life in a material way, but it was the election of President Trump in 2016. And living in San Francisco, I remember vividly that day of the election. I was out with my friends, and we were a bunch of people who went to a gym together, and we were all eating dinner, and we're all vain people who love how we look. And I remember how the election was changing on that day in a way from away from what we thought the targeted outcome was. And it's very hard to describe in words what it was like to live in a metropolitan area that was extremely progressive. I mean, I think San Francisco at that time, maybe even now, was the most progressive city of the United States.
Wow.
And to face the reality that your worldview was wrong was difficult enough. But most people I knew, including myself, thought it was a laughable outcome that President Trump was even running for president. You know, forget about whether he would win. It was a foregone conclusion he would lose. It was just the mockery of this person trying at all. And the next day, or as the dust settled, that it was completely different. I had an introspection that next day immediately, which was, there is something I am missing that millions of people in this country think in a different way. And the question that started my journey of all of these different political, religious, spiritual, philosophical questions was simply, what else is true that I'm missing? You know, because it was true that all these people were going to vote for him, and I was missing that. And I had this sense, what else is true that I'm missing? And the question of why did people vote for President Trump became, what is political conservatism, became, what are Judeo-Christian values, which became, who is Jesus Christ, which became, what is the Catholic Church? And eventually that became, how can I be a Catholic Christian? And like I said, I was an atheist, and I was so skeptical that of all religion that I didn't even believe that a man named Jesus Christ ever existed on the face of the earth. So I thought that this person was akin to the Hindu mythology, which I was given growing up, so that he was just as real as Shiva or Krishna or some of these deities that I was exposed to. I didn't realize whatsoever that the Bible is an authentic text, or that, you know, there's only proof really that he existed and what the early church was. None of this was ever made obvious to me at all. And the thing that was fascinating about Christianity and the Catholic Church was every question I had would be answered, and not just in an incomplete way, but everything about the church, every answer which was provided was always very full and very complete. It was Catholic. And the more questions I had, the more very, very well thought out, well researched, and very old answers I would have to any of the questions I had. And it always just kept convincing me more and more that this was true, what I was researching.
Now, how did you even know where to begin? Did you just hop online and start asking questions and seeing what pops up, and then eventually met friends and started to pepper them with personal questions, and then it kind of, being an invitation from there? Like, how does that even progress when you're going from 0 to 60 like that?
Yeah, it was all online resources.
Okay.
So I just began, like I said, trying to read and understand these different political concepts or philosophical concepts. And really, I reached a dead end. Everything I wanted to know about conservatism, whether it was being pro-life or it was something about immigration, whatever it was, the political articles and the political understanding is actually very shallow. And I very quickly kind of understood the Republican perspective or the political perspective. That really wasn't that hard to understand. It was really trying to go deeper and actually understand why people would claim to be Christian. Because I thought, growing from my beliefs, that a Christian was a person who burned Harry Potter books. I grew up in this conservative area of Florida, and what my exposure was to Christianity were people who wouldn't celebrate Halloween. Their parents wouldn't let them read Harry Potter. I knew people like that, but that didn't make sense to me, how that could be a voting motivation,
Now, God obviously...
So it was all online resources.
Okay.
It was all online resources,
Well, one thought comes to mind is, God made us kind of rational beings, and so, we want to live in harmony within ourselves, which means our beliefs need to line up with our behavior. And when one of those is kind of out of sync, then basically one of them has to go. And for a lot of people, it's just easier to get rid of the beliefs than it is to get rid of the behavior. And so it's like, oh, Trinity, catechism, daily mass. Oh, we'll just throw that out the window. We'll stick with the behavior. You kind of came at it where like, okay, your behavior's over here, and then your beliefs kind of stepped in. What happened then in terms of what your beliefs had to say about your behavior? And what was that transition like?
That's an amazing way to phrase it, Jason. You're absolutely right. My beliefs were changing to be Christian, but my behavior was very far from it. And at the moments that I was really discovering more and more about this very interesting, seemingly true perspective of Christianity and the Catholic Church, I was living with a woman, and we, would smoke marijuana. I mean, this is the kind of stuff that we would do. And eventually I was infected by the truth. I just couldn't deny the reality that I was seeing. And it was because the resources of Catholic people that I found online, this is through Catholic Answers and other apologists, they were completely convicted in what they believed. And the thing that was extremely powerful for me through them was not, this or that argument that they gave or this or that citation. It was actually their face, and it was their countenance in what they believed, that they were completely sure. And when I saw people who converted, and they would talk about how they used to have problems with drugs or alcohol or sex, and then they found the Lord and then they didn't, something rang true in me that I was struggling. And although in some ways materially things were going well, in many other ways they were not. And that is how the change happened for me inside, that I began to have that introspection that you referred to earlier. And I started to admit, I am not happy. This relationship I'm in is really not going very well. And whatever things are seemingly good on the surface really are not working for me. And the more I started to approach my behavior in a different way, really a lot of sacrifices were made. And this person I was with said that I was crazy and she no longer wanted to be with me. And she moved out and she took all the furniture, and I was literally just sleeping on the ground for months.
Wow.
And it was extremely painful, but those were days that I really had to make that choice. Am I going to bring my behavior to now agree with these beliefs that I've been exposed to, or will I continue to fail in these different various ways? And whether it was as a startup founder, I had failed many times. Romantic relationships, I had failed many times. I knew more and more through what I was learning and being exposed to that I was not really being successful. I was actually really failing, and I was actually in a lot of pain. And those were the things that started to change for me, that I had a choice. Should I forsake these beliefs and continue these behaviors? I was in enough humiliation where I couldn't really justify it anymore.
Yeah. Now, and I imagine your friends, your young tech millennial party buddies in Vegas, obviously they fully understood your newfound appreciation for the virtue of chastity, and I imagine had nothing but positive things to say about that lifestyle change. What was that like? When it's like you've got these buddies that you've been hanging with for years, it's all of a sudden like, I'm practicing chastity now. Like, how did that go over? Like, what happened in terms of the transition with friends, acceptance, rejection, finding new friends? Like, how did that happen?
Yeah, it's even like much quicker than even that. It's like, okay, we're going to go to a bar really late. Even those kinds of things I'm not going to be doing. So I probably lost 99% of the friends I had at that time. That was very hard. There was a long period of time where I didn't really have friends in church yet, and I couldn't really interact with those people who I knew. And these were those times that the truth had profoundly changed me, but it had not really been effectuated into my life. And that was really hard. That was really hard to not really have those friendships. I never even brought these concepts up with most, if not all, of those people I was friends with, because I couldn't even meet them where they were at. I have, friends now from church, and they're kind of like, oh, this is what I was doing at that time. And we would have never met, because all the activities that I would do at that time were really they precluded any kind of morality. And as I started to learn more about that, I didn't even have the chance to say goodbye to those friends, I would say, because I was so repulsed by who I was, and I was so repulsed by those activities. I didn't even get that send off of, hey, this is what I believe now, because I couldn't go to the party at 2 a.m. anymore. I couldn't be there to even tell them.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think a lot of people think when you're having these conversions, you have to like call up your friends, like, I'm not going to be your friend anymore, and it's just like burning the bridge, where more often than not, I mean, true friendship is the mutual perfection of the other. That's a sign of authentic friendship, whereas false friendship has the opposite effect, that the closer you get to this person, the less you become yourself. And so as you find these new interests, it's not necessarily that you want to ditch all your buds, it's just that the common shared interest, which had been sin and hedonism, wasn't there anymore. Like if your friendship with someone is based on quilting and like yours not into quilting anymore, you're probably not going to see each other at the quilt show that often because you're just going into this thing or that thing. And so it wasn't so much that you're just bailing all your friends. It was probably more that you kind of had one foot on the dock, one foot on the boat, and the boat was just setting sail. And so it's just like, okay, I'm going to end up dunking in the water unless I commit to one or the other. And so you just kind of hopped in the boat and God kind of took off with it. So imagine in that quest of aloneness, God put people in your paths that kind of introduced you to the church. What was it like coming into the Catholic Church for the first time? Like the first day you kind of walk into Catholic Church and like, what happened then?
Yeah, I came to RCIA. And the RCIA director was the first Catholic person I met in person in my journey, because everything I had done was all online resources. I was not catechized by any person I knew or any person in an in-person kind of way. There was no sharing of the faith that way. I kind of walked in with a huge amount of knowledge and research that I had done, and he was kind of surprised by how much that I knew. But I loved everything that I was learning. And I loved that there was this organization, the Catholic Church, or this book, the Bible, and all these resources, that there was an endless amount of relationship and truth and research and information that I could get in this institution. I mean, it was nothing like I had seen before. So when I walked into the RCIA program and I walked into church, intellectually, I was highly formed. But in terms of behavior or a relationship with God really was non-existent in a personal way. And really what has changed for me over that course of years now is meeting many friends who really prioritize their spiritual life, and meeting great people who are priests and great people who really love God, and myself being able to develop a life of prayer to become in a relationship with God. And those things changed me personally. I walked in knowing a lot, to be honest, but I didn't love God. I couldn't have loved God, And but once I joined the church and I received the sacraments of confirmation, of Holy Communion, that began the process of actually starting to love God. And it became it was very, very easy for me to forget and let go of my habits of sin and depravity, because I loved God more and more, and I did everything wrong under the sun. But since then, I have not drank any alcohol. I've not done any drugs. I'm engaged now, and my fiance and I have not kissed. We will kiss on the day we are married. Everything is easy because I saw the truth of God, and I really fell in love with God, and it allowed me to change what I was doing.
Yeah, no, what you're saying rings true to me. This morning I was talking to a gentleman after morning mass, and a lady came up to us, kind of asked us a prayer petition for something her daughter, grandkid was going through. And the advice my friend gave to her, he said, I don't know if you've read this book, but there's this one line in it where basically just when Jesus sees that you're going through a lot of stuff, he just says, look, I'll take care of the details. You just love God. That's it. And it was, he said, there's so much simplicity in that, of just like, all you have to focus on is loving Jesus. You just love Jesus, and then God's going to take care of all the details, as opposed to, okay, God, I know you love me, but I've got all these details to figure out. It's like, no, my job is just love him, and he's going to iron out all this stuff. And so I think because you had that gift of faith, because I think in your conversion, it shows it more clear than anything. Like, it's a gift. It's not like God just kind of reached in and says, I give this gift to you. And then obviously you receive that gift. So now he gives you this gift, it was to circle back a little bit in terms of relationships and where you've gone to where you're at. The girl that you were living with, I imagine you just started talking about this stuff of what you're thinking, what you're feeling, these new philosophies, theologies, and she just kind of looked at you like you had two heads and then headed out of Dodge. Like, is that pretty much what happened? Is just like you just started sharing with her what was becoming near and dear to your heart, and it was just so alien to her that you didn't really have to shut the door. God just took care of it?
That's exactly right. I remember distinctly, I said, I think you should go to RCIA with me. And she asked why. And I said, so you can go to heaven? And she said, you're crazy. And that was actually like the beginning of the end. And I remember, many times she would go out and be partying with her friends or our friends and doing drugs, whatever it was. And I was saying, hey, you have to stop doing this. We can't do this anymore. But there was definitely no way that was going to work. And yeah, it was basically, you're crazy was the feedback that I received.
Wow. No, but it's amazing to me that like if we put our trust in God and we just walk, so many obstacles that we had feared and that paralyzed us, he's able to just remove them if we just kind of walk in faith. But I think sometimes we're just like, no, there's too much to figure out. Like I meet all these young people that are in these like really toxic relationships, and they're just like, well, I don't know how to get out because of this and because of that. And we get all these factors in our head. And I think your story just tells us like, look, if you know what you're supposed to do, just walk with God and let him iron out all that stuff. Just stay faithful to the little things that he's asking you to do. If that one big thing just seems so overwhelming, like, I don't know how I'm going to get past that obstacle, that I'm just going to sit here. In a lot of ways, I think we choose to be confused. I don't know what I'm doing. Like sometimes confusion is actually a choice instead of being like, I have some uncertainty, but I know the path is leading that way. And I don't know how it's going to get around that mountain. I don't know it's going to how get around that boulder, but if I don't move, I'm not getting anywhere. So I'm just going to walk. I'm just going to walk in faith. And I think, what God has done in your life. Now you guys, when are you guys getting married? What are the plans there?
We're going to get married on December 10th in the church that we met at in San Francisco, and then we'll go to the Vatican, Rome, for our honeymoon. And, it's really interesting what you said. It kind of brings to mind, like, the trust in God, even in my career. I was a business person who tried many entrepreneurial ventures and probably 10 businesses that failed. And the first company I did after I converted worked, and it was precisely just because of what you said. I made it far more simple that I was going to try to act in virtue in my business rather than try to control everything. Mm-hmm. And that's the reason it worked, because God wanted it to work. And I think whether it's our personal life, our career, or anything else, I know for sure that you can make your life much more simple by just trusting God, and very, very good things will happen. Yeah. And my relationship is a great example of that. I had been in an unbelievable amount of failed romantic relationships, and I read your book, Dating Blueprint, and it was helpful for me to approach dating in a different way, in a Catholic way. I had never formed a relationship intentionally. Wow. Just think about that. I never formed a relationship intentionally, one time. And I never knew how to do it. I never learned how to do it. But through Catholic principles and trying to understand myself and understand the other person and human sexuality and all our church teachings, mm-hmm. I was able to actually date someone intentionally. And then now we're going to get married.
And I would imagine the very thing that turned off the wrong person from you was the very thing that attracted the right person to you.
Yeah, exactly. Being very intentional. And like I said, chastity from the beginning, not kissing, all that stuff. Obviously, that is not attractive to the wrong people, but it was very good for me and my fiance now. And she also joined the church as an adult. And we built our relationship on these principles intentionally, and it worked. And I'd never done it before. I mean, think about it. I had literally never done that before.
Yeah, no, like to go from like, okay, I don't know how to ride a tricycle to here's a motorcycle, and then you're off. I mean, to me, that's just a sign of God's the one behind this whole thing. This isn't just white knuckling it of just like, I'm going to make it happen. And like, you're more receiving the gift of faith than you are trying to manufacture and control it. And I think that's why God has brought you so far along. It's like you've learned how far you can get with grasping versus how much further you can get from just receiving. Now, before we close, what would you say to somebody who's kind of maybe in that spot of just, on the fence of exploring, of just like, well, if I go all in, what is that going to mean to my professional life, to my dating relationships, to my family relationships, like to the person that has fear? Because I think a lot of times that's kind of almost the last hurdle that they have to get through, that intellectually or spiritually they're kind of feeling drawn, but there's that hurdle there of fear. What would maybe you could possibly say that person kind of shove them over that?
You know what? I mean, my relationship with my family is really tough. Like I mentioned, they've kind of rejected my conversion, and I really gave everything to be a Catholic Christian. And I still routinely, maybe every week when I receive communion, I still say to myself, I can't believe that I get to do this. And I would say for anyone who is not sure, that maybe what will work for you is what worked for me. And that's just the purity of the truth and the purity of understanding that God, the creator of the universe, came here to establish the Catholic Church and give us all these teachings. And I would say if we really understand who God is and the omnipotence that he has, why would we not follow him completely? I'll speak more to what really changed me, and that was the truth of the matter. Just the nature of who Jesus Christ was and his establishment of the church. I could just say to myself, who am I to disagree with this man? Who am I to disagree with this organization? Who am I to disagree with this path? And that required humility, but it's very easy, I think, if you see things in this way, the purity of the truth, that we as human beings are no one to disagree with this path that God has laid for us. And the path for every single human being, including me, is to know him preferably through the church and its sacraments. And we must live in a way that we're in a state of grace, that we can receive these sacraments so we know him better. And I would say to anyone who's afraid, my version of it would be, go find out the truth. It's because there's no doubt. Right? Go find out the truth and you'll see you don't have to rely on yourself. It's like you said, you don't have to be grasping anymore, because if you build your life on the foundation of truth, then you don't have to make these impossible decisions for yourself. If I can just say this one more point, like I realized when I didn't know Christianity, when I didn't know the Lord, I had to make my life encounter everything. Every choice we make has a moral component, everything, right? And when you don't have the real moral foundation, that means every single choice you make in your life, you have to try to think about what is good, what is bad for yourself. And when you let go of that and you trust in the church, it simplifies your life, and you can actually spend your energy so much more efficiently, because 99% of decisions are really clear because you want to do what is moral and good. And that's really the divine simplicity that you can bring into your life, that it's very simple to do what is right. But I believe the foundation is the truth, which is God entered into human history for a reason, right? That's the unique aspect of the Christian story, is not because God knows every single person in the universe from the beginning, but it's that he came here and entered into our history as fact. That's what changed me. And I really believe that can change anyone who doubts, because if you doubt, it means you don't understand what that means, I think.
No, I think your life is kind of a testimony that the real thing to be afraid of is not the obstacles that seem to demand all of your attention. To me, the real fear is letting your life be dictated by fear. That's the thing you really want to be afraid of. I mean, because you look at your life now versus your life 10 years ago or whatever, that's a lot scarier, than what God has blessed you with through just trusting him.
That's a great point.
So to me, trust is kind of that key that unlocks kind of like this vault of limitless graces, but that's just not at our disposal if we don't have that key of trust. It just stays locked up, and God wants to pour it out on us, where it's just like, I have to earn all that stuff. But if we could just trust, unlock it, then you realize, like I said, the real fear isn't these perceived obstacles. The real fear is looking back on your deathbed at your life and realizing how much of it had been controlled by the fear of unknown. Because if you can just overcome that fear, and it's okay to be afraid of it, I think. I mean, we don't want to pretend like to be this like ultra human, I have no fear. Courage isn't even possible without fear. Because if you're like storming the beaches of Normandy, like, I'm not afraid of anything, like you got mental issues, like there should be fear, but that's precisely why there's courage, to be able to look at it in the eyes, say, you can be in the room, but you're not going to be able to dictate my decisions. To me, that's authentic courage. So, as we wrap up, you'd mentioned you're doing something with, I guess, Fide is the new name of a project you're working on. Can you tell the listeners a little bit about what God's got you doing now?
Sure, yeah. So been very blessed financially, professionally with what happened last year for Pantenix. And this year I started a new email service called fide.email with a Catholic friend of mine I actually met in RCIA. And what we're doing is offering email products and competitor products to Microsoft Office and Google Workspace with a Catholic perspective, because we're a Catholic company. And I think for anyone who's mission oriented in their life or their business or their parish, it's a great alternative then for working with big tech companies who have values that are antithetical to ours. No. So I say for anyone who is mission oriented in your life, or you have a nonprofit which is has Catholic principles that you want to accomplish, or certainly if you have a parish, when you work with these businesses who disagree with us, you're making your life harder, because they use those resources and they use their power to share ideas which make our mission and our apostolates harder. And that's why we kind of created this, to be an option for those where you can use it's really feature by feature the same thing, but you can work with us and trust us that we're not going to use the money or do anything nefarious with your business relationship with us.
Now, where do people learn about it?
Yeah, www.fide, like faith in Latin, FIDEI.email instead of .com, .email, fide.email.
Awesome. Well, Kailash, can't thank you enough for coming on the program today. I want to thank you. I want to also thank everybody who's listening who's one of our patrons. If anyone wants to support the program and help us just get more of these podcasts and videos out, you just go to patreon.com/Jason Evert, and you can sign up and say, hey, I'll give $5 a month, give $10 a month, 20, whatever. We'll send you t-shirts, books, emails, all kinds of stuff, just in gratitude for you helping us to get this message out. But Kailash, I just want to ask all of our listeners in closing to pray for you as you prepare for your wedding coming up on December 10th. I mean, we're like 33, 34 days away. Is that right?
Yeah, we're going to do our Marian consecration to end on that day. So it's 33 days.
Perfect. That is awesome. Well, God bless you. Thank you for your witness for everybody. And I would just ask everybody when you're done listening to this to offer up a prayer for Kailash and his bride-to-be that as they embark on what G.K. Chesterton said. He said, marriage is a great adventure like going to war. So, God has put you guys on the front lines, because I think nothing is needed more than what you guys are about to enter into. And so I just invite all our listeners, as an act of gratitude to you, to pray for you guys and, God willing, the future family. So Kailash, thank you for coming on the show today.
Thank you, Jason.
God bless.